Today, we become legends.
Smite Year 10 has been a wild ride. I would say it's been the year with the most radical changes so far. We've bounced around from tank metas to burst metas to assassins being broken to mages being broken, sweeping changes that affect the whole game like 10.3 which created its own mini healing meta for a few months. It's been a wacky season, and if you say anything about Year 10, it should be that it wasn't boring. There was so much change this year that it almost felt overwhelming at times, even for me as someone whose life practically revolves around this game. For you watching, there's a good chance you felt that way too. So let's jump in and discuss everything that's happened since the year launched in 10.1 with the Fire Giant update.
Hello everybody and welcome to an incredible update show. This is the kickoff of Smite's Year 10 update show 10.1, the Fire Giant update.
10.1 was a game changer. We were greeted with an entirely new conquest map which was sort of a reboot after Season 8's map had a lot of specific mechanics added over the years. Year 10 launched with pretty much none of those mechanics and was a relatively bare bones map all things considered. Given the sheer magnitude of the changes we'd experience in the coming patches, this makes a lot of sense, as complicating the map right at launch only to add dozens more complex mechanics over the year could have resulted in an absolute shit show by this point. That said, we did get a couple of small things to bring some uniqueness to the Year 10 Conquest map, most notably the Pyromancer Bomb and Tower Bastions, as well as the new silver and gold buffs in the solo and duo lane respectively. These don't radically change how the game is played or anything, but as mentioned earlier, I think this was the correct approach given how much would be added later in the year. We also saw the addition of Unleashed Jungle Camps, which radically changed up the stats for Year 10, as we could now group up and fight 2 or 3 jungle camps at once, allowing players to hit level 2 right as they went into lane. An extra speed buff was also added and green was moved towards mid lane. And finally for Conquest we saw the addition of Cyclops Rogues, which are again quite a minor addition that doesn't radically change the way Conquest is played. We of course got our first new god of Year 10 in 10.1 with the Fire Giant released as a playable god, Surtur. While seemingly pretty broken at release, after a short time and a couple of nerfs he pretty much fell off the map, and while I do think he's a worthwhile addition to the roster of warriors, he does feel like he's lacking the spark to make him one of the absolute most fun. That said, he's a solid addition and I do have fun playing him. Shards were introduced in 10.1 as well to broaden the options players had before level 12. Prior to this we just all had Vision Shard, but with the addition of Horn Shard, Claw Shard, Wing Shard and Carapace Shard we now had more options to spice up the early game. One of the biggest changes in 10.1 was the removal of several item trees and consolidation of remaining items into trees that make a bit more sense and share stats across all items in that tree. In total, 20 tier 3 items were removed with this change, which included some fan favourites like Hide of the Nemean Lion and Witchblade, which was later added as a glyph to Relic Dagger. There was also a major rebalance of Bruiser or Hybrid items this patch, with a clear rule set that no tier 3 item can have power and protections at the same time. Health and power is fine, but any item that had both prots and power was removed or reworked into a form that satisfied the new rules, such as Gladiator Shield, which now became available to any god regardless of power type since it now had no power on it. The implications of this game were huge and are still impacting the game to this day, so if you want more details on the impacts of this change, I have several videos discussing it up on my channel already. I won't go too in depth here though, as this will already be a very long video. All anti-heal items got additional passives in 10.1 as well, such as Divine Ruin's Chain Lightning effect or Contagion's Damage Pulse, which was hilariously broken and bugged at launch, to the point where if you didn't build it and the enemy did, you just kind of lost. It was doing more damage than some abilities in this bugged state. There were of course many other changes made to items in this update, but these are the main game-wide sweeping changes we got in 10.1. The class bonuses were also added here, with warriors getting CDR, assassins getting penetration, mages getting power, guardians getting CCR, and hunters getting basic attack damage. These were fun to use at first, but seem to have caused problems down the line, such as warriors being very limited in their CDR options, or mages getting so much free power that they have taken over the solo lane meta, but more on that later. And finally for 10.1, I just wanted to mention Release Prophetic Cloak, as it might be the most broken item to release in modern Smite. This thing had 85 of both protections, 150 health, 20% CDR, and 20% mits on launch, which is just crazy to think about. The CDR was later cut in half, the mitigations nerfed down, and the total protections taken from 85 to 60, and this item is still really good once you get it stacked. 10.1 was truly a crazy launch patch to kick off the new year of Smite, which also introduced a new format with 4 seasons throughout the year, later revised to 5 with the Season of Worlds.
Welcome to another Smite update show. This is the 10.2, the King of the Manticores update show, and the second update of our first season of Year 10, the Season of Monsters.
Patch 10.2 was the final patch of the Season of Monsters and brought us Manticoras, who was a bit underestimated at release but quickly became the most broken god in the game, completely dominating both mid and ADC for months to come until he got several heavy nerfs to bring him into balance. 10.1's changes brought on a pretty heavy tank meta with the bugged Contagion, Stoner Binding which had 25 pen at launch, and Prophetic Cloak being an extremely efficient defense item for the cost, even Archdruid's Fury allowing tanks to threaten backliners since the damage was much higher than it is now and was true instead of magical. We also went through a very brief mitigation meta in 10.1 with Sigil of the Old Guard at the forefront after having his passive reworked. Being able to stack mitigation to over 50%, sometimes as high as in the 80s, was pretty ridiculous, and while this type of build didn't really do any damage, you were quite literally unkillable in certain specific setups, so something needed to be done. 10.2 brought nerfs to many of these mitigation and general tank items, as well as buffs to damage dealer options like Kin Size and Bladed Boomerang.
That is right, everybody. Welcome to the Smite Season of Hope. I'm Titan Dandy, and I'm joined...
As the Season of Monsters came to a close, we were greeted with the Season of Hope, whose launch patch 10.3 brought a significant overhaul to how healing works in Smite. This is just one of many huge shifts in the core of Smite functions this year. A new healing tree was added for both physical and magical, consisting of items that almost no one has ever bought outside of meme builds. All sources of healing, including lifesteal, were nerfed by roughly 1/3 in this patch, which would make you think that surely healers were unviable in 10.3. Well, you might have been right had they not also majorly changed the core team healers of Smite, most notably Aphrodite and Hell, and the subsequent meta we found ourselves in was completely dominated by healers despite the patch aiming to make healing weaker overall. I have to say that personally this was one of the least fun times to play of the year, with Aphrodite specifically dominating from the support role where previously she had been mostly a mid laner. The changes allowed her to build full tank, share 20% of those defenses with her soulmate, and still heal a solid amount since the heal now scaled with level and not power, and you didn't need to build any power in your build to still dish out significant healing. Gone were the days when Afro was at least squishy enough that she died if her ult was down. She was now a tanky support who was damn near unkillable. Many gods got nerfs to healing and lifesteal and were compensated with buffs to other areas of their kit where needed this patch, but while it is hard to get this kind of patch exactly right in terms of balance, it did leave many gods behind that relied on their self-sustain and got caught in the crossfire of team healers being broken. This would be remedied in later patches. Another change that was made in 10.3 was the anti-snowball mechanics, such as larger shutdown rewards, less XP and gold for killing enemies on a death streak, and the free gold chests at back camps. This change wasn't that controversial at the time, but looking back on it, I don't think this was needed whatsoever and led to the entire rest of the year being a very slow, late game focused meta, where teams struggled to build a substantial lead due to one shutdown or all the free gold from chests evaporating any lead you had. It sort of shifted the balance to where you actually have to play more careful and make less mistakes when you're ahead rather than the other way around, since one mistake could evaporate your entire lead. 10.3 overall was a very interesting patch to play on. In some ways it was necessary to counter the meta at the time and stop team healers dominating high level play, but it also had unintended consequences across the entire game that led to issues down the line.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another beautiful Smite update show. I am Titan Dandy. Nice to see y'all again, and we're looking forward to talking about update 10.4. The Lightweaver.
Patch 10.4 brought us a new god in Ishel, who I think in general was a great addition to the game, and was one of the more balanced releases we've had in recent years. After the heavy tank itemization nerfs in 10.2, we had been in a very damage-focused bursty meta for a couple of patches at this point, and in 10.4, percent pen was nerfed by roughly 20% across the board. All 10% items were now 8%, 20% items were now 16%, and the cap was now 32% instead of 40%. Alongside this, some tank item buffs were dropped in 10.4, though they were pretty minor and didn't bring on the same kind of tank meta that 10.1 did. This patch also started the hilariously overdone Book of Thoth nerfs, with the item getting nerfed in 3 consecutive patches, despite people switching to Flat Pen or Doom Orb Rush after the very first nerf to Book. Other than that, patch 10.4 was pretty small given the magnitude of 10.3's changes, and mainly looked to iron out any issues caused by such sweeping changes.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome to the 10.5 update show. My name's Isaiah, and I'm going to be your host today.
Patch 10.5 opened with a cap to damage mitigation from items, which, sort of like many changes this year, came far too late after the problem had already been solved. The nerfs to mitigation items in 10.2 had been enough to stop the mitigation stacking meta, and no one had been building that way for several patches at this point. That said, damage mitigation was now capped at 25%, with whichever mitigation number is higher from items or abilities counting. This will be changed later down the line to allow god abilities to stack with items and bypass that cap, since with these changes previously, your items became useless if your god had significant mitigation built in, and vice versa. It's probably worth mentioning the Bloodforge revert that happened in 10.5. Attack speed was added to this item a few patches back, and it became literally the most popular item in the game as both a rush for ADCs and a late game pickup for junglers. Anyone who played back then will remember how meta-defining Bloodforge was for a few patches, definitely worth a mention.
Hello everybody and welcome to Smite's Season of Souls update show. I am Titan Dandy, honored.
With the Season of Hope concluding, we moved into the Season of Souls with patch 10.6. This update brought significant changes to Conquest with a darker map, the addition of Beacon, Unleashed Titans, and the mechanic we all love to forget even happened, Soul Surges. These new mechanics brought a very fresh feeling to Conquest, which had gone 6 months without any major mechanic changes after 10.1, which sort of reset the map with the removal of Season 9 mechanics like Trebuchets and Indra's Scepter. 10.6 also brought us new glyphs for Relic Dagger, Runeforged Hammer, and most importantly Pridwin, which completely dominated the meta at release. The Season of Souls also followed in the Season of Hope's footsteps with another sweeping game-wide change. This time it was the Great Stat Squish, where every item in the game had its power reduced by 30% and its health and protections reduced by 15%. This offset was due to the meta being heavily against tanks at the time, so reducing power by more than protections and health should result in tanks across the board being overall stronger and harder to kill, regardless of build.
Happy Thursday, and welcome to the Smite Update Show 10.7 for our boy, Charon the Ferryman, the Mighty Boatman. We love him, we're excited about him, and we're happy to have you here.
Patch 10.7 brought our next addition to the battleground in Charon, who is still a pretty popular support pick to this day. 10.7 was one of the smaller patches of the year, with just a few targeted buffs and nerfs, such as for Red Pridwin, which I previously mentioned was dominating the meta at the time, as well as the buff to the mage's free power class bonus, and some small nerfs to high priority solo laners at the time in Raven and Tia, who rose to the top off of the back of earlier buffs and their incredible use of Pridwin.
But anyway, we got a lot in store today. So this is the 10.8 update for those of you who didn't feel like reading the title. And with this a lot of stuff. We have Avatar: The Last Airbender content.
Patch 10.8 brought the removal of Soul Surges, which was a respectable decision by Hi-Rez. No one liked them, they didn't really add anything to the game beyond the annoyance of having your recall or blink stopped by the Spirit Minions' ranged attacks, and while it did take a little longer than was hoped, they admitted they were wrong with these and that Soul Surges were not good for the game overall, so they were completely removed in 10.8. Good riddance. Underworld Arena was also added in this patch as well, with a few new mechanics to spice up a very simple game mode. Fire Giant was added alongside Pyroclast boulders that you can send at your enemies to damage and knock them back, as well as the return of the bonus round at the end of Arena. Starter items were also re-added to Joust in this patch after being removed earlier in the year for balance reasons. Green starters are still banned to this day as they were the main offenders, but it was nice to see starters return in some capacity for Joust. Some small buffs to auto-attack solo laner items, ability damage jungler items, and some of the new healing tree items from 10.3 that hadn't seen play in a while came in this update, but other than that, nothing too crazy was added or changed in patch 10.8, which is understandable given it was the last patch of the Season of Souls.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Smite Update show, this time for the Season of Celebration. My name is Titan Dandy and I'm joined here by two other...
Which leads us into what we thought would be the last season of the year, the Season of Celebration. Starting with patch 10.9, the Dark Underworld map for Conquest was replaced with a more bright autumnal aesthetic to fit the theme of the season, a very welcome change as many players were getting sick of such a dark and dreary map that we'd had for almost 3 months at this point. Spirit Totems and the Shaman Camp were added in patch 10.9 as well, which were a great addition to add a little something extra to think about in a match. These added extra effects such as CDR, lifesteal, health, attack speed or percent pen allowed you to fill gaps in your build and maybe even plan your build around not capping out on a certain stat like cooldown, so that you can grab the relevant totem effect in the late game. We also saw the addition of recipes in this patch, which were a little bit less successful overall than Shaman camps, but still a solid addition. At launch, everyone and their mothers was just building Bountiful Bow, as it provided CDR, which was useful to almost every god and playstyle in the game. Though ADCs and a certain few auto-attack junglers or solo laners would pick up golden gooseberries in its place. These two recipes accounted for basically 95% of all food items picked up, and it sort of remains that way to this day, even with buffs to the other recipes that came later. The Beacon and Unleashed Titans got a second round of usage in this patch as well. As we all know, Conquest matches were going literally the longest in Smite history on average at this point, and so allowing another round of 3 Beacons and 1 more Unleashed Titan fight was aimed to help alleviate these longer games and force them to end a bit earlier. It did help, but didn't really solve the core issue of games remaining very long to this day, even at the end of the year. 10.9 was a big patch, and alongside these new mechanics and updates to old ones, we also got what Hi-Res calls spicy changes, which were essentially mini soft reworks to problematic and low performing gods. These changes were sort of a mixed bag, with some like the Osiris, Ares and King Arthur changes working as intended to bring these gods some new ways to play and help them out a bit as they've been struggling. However, I would say the majority of these changes led to said gods being completely dominant, such as Athena, Chernobog, Raijin and Pele. Most of these cases are still completely breaking the meta even as I'm writing this video in December, so I would say that overall, these spicy changes were very much a mixed bag. If these overperformers had been nerfed into balance more quickly, I would rate these changes much higher, as I think they're a great idea to bring older or less well-performing gods back into the fold. But I can't simply overlook the balance issues that arose from these changes that are still infesting the game to this day.
Hello everybody and welcome to another Smite update show. I am Titan Dandy, honored to be here with y'all today.
Patch 10.10 brought us the penultimate god of the year in Maman Brigitte, who I personally think was by far the best release of the year in terms of fun factor. With her being such a crazy and unique god, she absolutely had and still has balance issues that need to be ironed out, but in terms of the core design of her kit, she was an excellent release in my opinion. 10.10 was also the culmination of many changes over the course of the year and a few new changes in this patch, which led to the rise of the mage solo meta that we are still experiencing as of writing this video. This meta is very much fresh on the minds of players as we're still in the depths of it as of writing, so I won't spend long on it, but this was pretty much the patch where it all started. Patch 10.11 didn't really bring much in terms of changes, as the final patch of the Season of Celebration, which in itself brought many new mechanics and changes, all that was really done in 10.11 was small buffs to underperformers and small nerfs to overperformers. Patch 10.12, despite being a new season that we didn't initially know we were getting, brought much of the same. Small changes leading up to the World Championship, which attempted to shift the meta of solo lane away from mages, but was pretty unsuccessful in doing so. And finally, we arrive at patch 10.13, the final patch of Year 10 Smite, which dropped very recently as of writing, and was much of the same compared to the previous two patches. Though I would say 10.13's changes will make more of an impact on the meta. We got plenty of mage solo nerfs to the gods and builds that they use, alongside some small buffs to warriors and their itemization before the World Championship. We also got our final new god of the year in 10.13, Bake Kujira, who is very new as of writing this, but seems to already be quite a polarizing release in the eyes of the player base. I've seen the whole spectrum with this god, from people saying he's the coolest god in years to people saying he's ridiculously boring and low skill. And now we arrive at today. All patches for Year 10 are done at this point, and all we're waiting on is the World Championship before we launch into Year 11. Best of luck to the teams, and for what it's worth, my money's on Ferryman. Year 10 has been a wild ride, with meta shifts out the wazoo, new content, 6 new gods, and tons more. What's your overall thoughts on this year? Is it one of the better years of Smite you've experienced, or was it one of the worst? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.